Sustainable Development Goals. SDG redirects here. For other uses, see SDG disambiguation. Sustainable Development Goals. Mission Statement. A shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future. 1. Type of project. Non-profit. Location. Global. Founder. United Nations. Established. 2015. Website. sdgs.un.org. Show less. The Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, or global goals are a collection of 17 interlinked objectives designed to serve as a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future. 1. 2. 3. The short titles of the 17 SDGs are No Poverty, SDG 1, Zero Hunger, SDG 2, Good Health and Well-being, SDG 3, Quality Education, SDG 4, Gender Equality, SDG 5, Clean Water and Sanitation, SDG 6, Affordable and Clean Energy, SDG 7, Decent Work and Economic Growth, SDG 8, Industry, Innovation and Infrastructure, SDG 9, Reduced Inequalities, SDG 10, Sustainable Cities and Communities, SDG 11, Responsible Consumption and Production, SDG 12, Climate Action, SDG 13, Life Below Water, SDG 14, Life on Land, SDG 15, Peace, Justice and Strong Institutions, SDG 16, and Partnerships for the Goals, SDG 17. The SDGs emphasize the interconnected environmental, social and economic aspects of sustainable development by putting sustainability at their center. 4. 5. In 2015, the United Nations General Assembly, UNGA, created the SDGs as part of the post-2015 development agenda. This agenda sought to design a new global development framework, replacing the Millennium Development Goals, which were completed that same year. These goals were formally articulated and adopted in a UNG resolution known as the 2030 Agenda, often informally referred to as Agenda 2030-7 on 6 July 2017. The SDGs were made more actionable by a UNG resolution that identifies specific targets for each goal and provides indicators to measure progress. 8. Most targets are to be achieved by 2030. Although some have no end date. No. There are cross-cutting issues and synergies between the different goals. For example, for SDG 13 on climate action, the IPCC sees robust synergies with SDGs 13, health, 7, clean energy, 11, cities and communities, 12, responsible consumption and production, and 14, oceans. 10, 11, 17. On the other hand, critics and observers have also identified trade-offs between the goals, 11, such as between ending hunger and promoting environmental sustainability. 12, 26. Furthermore, concerns have arisen over the high number of goals compared to the 8 Millennium Development Goals, leading to compounded trade-offs, a weak emphasis on environmental sustainability, and difficulties tracking qualitative indicators. The SDGs are monitored by the UN, United Nations, High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, HLPF, an annual forum held under the auspices of the United Nations Economic and Social Council. However, the HLPF comes with its own set of problems due to a lack of political leadership and divergent national interests. 13. Those sought to facilitate monitoring of progress on SDG implementation. The online SDG tracker was launched in June 2018 to present all available data across all indicators. 14. The COVID-19 pandemic had serious negative impacts on all 17 SDGs in 2020. 1. Part a scientific assessment of the political impacts of the SDGs found in 2022 that the SDGs have only had limited transformative political impact thus far. Solar at the very least, they have affected the way actors understand and communicate about sustainable development. Solar. Adoption. Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, UN Resolution A-71, containing the goals, October 2015. A diagram listing the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. On 25 September 2015, the 193 countries of the UN General Assembly adopted the 2030 Development Agenda titled Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, 17, 18, 19. This agenda has 92 paragraphs. Paragraph 59 outlines the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the associated 169 targets and 232 indicators. The UNLED process involved its 193 member states and global civil society. The resolution is a broad intergovernmental agreement that acts as the post-2015 development agenda. The SDGs build on the principles agreed upon in Resolution A-288, entitled The Future We Want. This was a non-binding document released as a result of Rio Plus Bees conference held in 2012. Implementation. Cost comparison for UN goals. Implementation of the SDGs started worldwide in 2016. This process can also be called localizing the SDGs. In 2019, Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, issued a global call for a decade of action to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. 1. This decade will last from 2020 to 2030. The plan is that the Secretary General of the UN will convene an annual platform for driving the decade of action. Bias. There are two main types of actors for implementation of the SDGs, state and non-state actors. Solar state actors include national governments and subnational authorities, whereas non-state actors are corporations and civil society. Civil society participation and empowerment is important, but there are also diverse interests in this group. Building new partnerships is useful. However, the SDGs are not legally binding and purposefully designed to provide much leeway for actors. Therefore, they can interpret the goals differently and often according to their interests. Solar. Content of the 17 goals. Structure of goals, targets and indicators. The lists of targets and indicators for each of the 17 SDGs was published in a UN resolution in July 2017. 8. Each goal typically has 8, 12 targets, and each target has between 1 and 4 indicators used to measure progress toward reaching the targets, with the average of 8.5 indicators per target. 24. The targets are either outcome targets, circumstances to be attained, or means of implementation targets. 25. The latter targets were introduced late in the process of negotiating the SDGs to address the concern of some member states about how the SDGs were to be achieved. Goal 17 is wholly about how the SDGs will be achieved. 25. The numbering system of targets is as follows. Outcome targets use numbers, whereas means of implementation targets use lowercase letters. 25 for example, SDG 6 has a total of 8 targets. The first 6 are outcome targets and are labeled targets 6.1 to 6.6. The final 2 targets are means of implementation targets and are labeled as targets chair.a and chair.b. The United Nations Statistics Division, UNSD, website provides a current official indicator list which includes all updates until the 51st session Statistical Commission in March 2020. The indicators for the targets have varying levels of methodological development and availability of data at the global level. 26 initially, some indicators, called Tier 3 indicators, had no internationally established methodology or standards. Later, the global indicator framework was adjusted so that Tier 3 indicators were either abandoned, replaced or refined. 26 as of 17 July 2020, there were 231 unique indicators. 26 Data or information must address all vulnerable groups such as children, elderly folks, persons with disabilities, refugees, indigenous peoples, migrants, and internally displaced persons. 27 Reviews of indicators. The indicator framework was comprehensively reviewed at the 51st session of the United Nations Statistical Commission in 2020. It will be reviewed again in 2025.28 at the 51st session of the Statistical Commission, held in New York City from 3 March 2020. A total of 36 changes to the global indicator framework were proposed for the Commission's consideration. Some indicators were replaced, revised or deleted. 28 between 15 October 2018 and 17 April 2020. Other changes were made to the indicators. 29 yet their measurement continues to be fraught with difficulties. 30 Listing of 17 goals with their targets and indicators. Further information, list of Sustainable Development Goal targets and indicators. Goal 8, no poverty. SDG 8. SDG 8 is to end poverty in all its forms everywhere. 31 achieving SDG 8 would end extreme poverty globally by 2030. One of its indicators is the proportion of population living below the poverty line. 31 the data gets analyzed by sex, age, employment status, and geographical location, urban rural. This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 1. The goal has 7 targets and 13 indicators to measure progress. The 5 outcome targets are eradication of extreme poverty, reduction of all poverty by half, implementation of social protection systems, ensuring equal rights to ownership, basic services, technology and economic resources, and the building of resilience to environmental, economic and social disasters. The 2 targets related to means of implementation but these SDG 8 are mobilization of resources to end poverty and the establishment of poverty eradication policy frameworks at all levels. 34 Goal 2, zero hunger, no hunger. Sufficient and healthy foods should be made available to everyone. SDG 2 is to end hunger, achieve food security and improved nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. These indicators for this goal are, for example, the prevalence of undernourishment, prevalence of severe food insecurity, and prevalence of stunting among children under 5 years of age. This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 2. SDG 2 has 8 targets and 14 indicators to measure progress. 36 the 5 outcome targets are ending hunger and improving access to food, ending all forms of malnutrition, agricultural productivity, sustainable food production systems and resilient agricultural practices, and genetic diversity of seeds, cultivated plants and farmed and domesticated animals, investments, research and technology. The 3 means of implementation targets set these include addressing trade restrictions and distortions in world agricultural markets and food commodity markets and their derivatives. 36 Goal 3, good health and well-being. SDG 3 is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. 29 important indicators here are life expectancy as well as child and maternal mortality. Further indicators are, for example, deaths from road traffic injuries, prevalence of current tobacco use, suicide mortality rate. 29 This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 3. SDG 3 has 13 targets and 28 indicators to measure progress toward targets. The first 9 targets are outcome targets. Reducing maternal mortality. Ending all preventable deaths under 5 years of age. Fighting communicable diseases. Reducing mortality from non-communicable diseases and promoting mental health. Preventing and treating substance abuse. Reducing road injuries and deaths. Granting universal access to sexual and reproductive care, family planning and education. Achieving universal health coverage. Reducing illnesses and deaths from hazardous chemicals and pollution. Implementing the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. Supporting research, development, and universal access to affordable vaccines and medicines. Increasing health financing and support the health workforce in developing countries. Improving early warning systems for global health risks. 40 Goal 4, quality education. School children in Kakuma refugee camp, Kenya. SDG 4 is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. 41 the indicators for this goal are, for example, attendance rates at primary schools, completion rates of primary school education, participation in tertiary education, and so forth. In each case, parity indices are looked at to ensure that disadvantaged students do not miss out. Data is collected on female male, rural urban, bottom top wealth quintile, and others such as disability status, indigenous peoples. There is also an indicator around the facilities that the school buildings have, access to electricity, the internet, computers, drinking water, toilets, etc. 41 This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 4. SDG 4 has 10 targets which are measured by 11 indicators. The 7 outcome targets are free primary and secondary education, equal access to quality pre-primary education, affordable technical, vocational and higher education, increased number of people with relevant skills for financial success, elimination of all discrimination in education, universal literacy and numeracy, and education for sustainable development and global citizenship. The 3 means of implementation targets 42 are build and upgrade inclusive and safe schools, expand higher education scholarships for developing countries, and increase the supply of qualified teachers in developing countries. Goal 5, gender equality. SDG 5 is to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Their tallies indicators include, for example, having suitable legal frameworks and the representation by women in national parliament or in local deliberative bodies. 15 numbers on forced marriage and female genital mutilation cutting (FGMC) are also included in another indicator. 44 This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 5. Ending all forms of discrimination against all women and girls everywhere. Ending violence and exploitation of women and girls. Eliminating harmful practices such as child early and forced marriage and female genital mutilation. Increasing value of unpaid care and promoting shared domestic responsibilities. Ensuring full participation of women in leadership and decision-making. Ensuring access to universal reproductive rights and health. The three means of implementation targets 45 are: fostering equal rights to economic resources, property ownership, and financial services for women. Promoting empowerment of women through technology. Adopting and strengthening policies for gender equality and supporting legislation to enforce it. Chialis. Goal 6. Clean water and sanitation. Example of sanitation for all, school toilet, IPH school and college, Mohali, Dhaka, Bangladesh. SDG 6 is to ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. Certainly, the Joint Monitoring Program, JMP, of WHO and UNICEF is responsible for monitoring progress to achieve the first two targets of this goal. Important indicators for this goal are the percentages of the population that uses safely managed drinking water and has access to safely managed sanitation. The JMP reported in 2017 that 4.5 billion people do not have safely managed sanitation. 48 Another indicator looks at the proportion of domestic and industrial wastewater that is safely treated. This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 6. The 6 outcome targets include provide safe and affordable drinking water, end open defecation, and provide access to sanitation and hygiene, improve water quality, wastewater treatment and safe reuse, increase water use efficiency and ensure fresh water supplies, implement IWRM, protect and restore water-related ecosystems. The two means of implementing these targets are to expand water and sanitation support to developing countries and to support local engagement in water and sanitation management. 50 Goal 7. Affordable and clean energy. SDG 7 is to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all. 51 One of the indicators for this goal is the percentage of population with access to electricity. Progress in expanding access to electricity has been made in several countries, notably India, Bangladesh, and Kenya. 52 Other indicators look at the renewable energy share and energy efficiency. This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 7. The goal has 5 targets to be achieved by 2030. Progress towards the targets is measured by 6 indicators. 3 out of the 5 targets are outcome targets: universal access to modern energy, increase global percentage of renewable energy, double the improvement in energy efficiency. The remaining 2 targets are means of implementation. Targets 54, to promote access to research, technology and investments in clean energy, and expand and upgrade energy services for developing countries. In other words, these targets include access to affordable and reliable energy while increasing the share of renewable energy in the global energy mix. They also focus on improving energy efficiency, international cooperation, and investment in clean energy infrastructure. Goal 8. Decent work and economic growth. SDG 8 is to promote sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. But one important indicators for this goal include economic growth in least developed countries and the rate of real GDP per capita. Further examples are rates of youth unemployment and occupational injuries or the number of women engaged in the labor force compared to men. 55 This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 8. SDG 8 has 12 targets in total to be achieved by 2030. Some targets are for 2030, others are for 2020. The first 10 are outcome targets. These are sustainable economic growth, diversify, innovate and upgrade for economic productivity, promote policies to support job creation and growing enterprises, improve resource efficiency in consumption and production, full employment and decent work with equal pay, promote youth employment, education and training, end modern slavery, trafficking, and child labor, protect labor rights and promote safe working environments, promote beneficial and sustainable tourism, universal access to banking, insurance and financial services. In addition, there are also 2 targets for means of implementation 56, which are increase aid for trade support, develop a global youth employment strategy. Goal 9. Industry, innovation and infrastructure. SDG 9 is to build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. 57 indicators in this goal include, for example, the proportion of people who are employed in manufacturing activities, are living in areas covered by a mobile network, or who have access to the internet. 15 An indicator that is connected to climate change is CO2 emissions per unit of value added. This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 9. SDG 9 has 8 targets, and progress is measured by 12 indicators. The first 5 targets are outcome targets: develop sustainable, resilient, and inclusive infrastructures, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, increase access to financial services and markets, upgrade all industries and infrastructures for sustainability, enhance research, and upgrade industrial technologies. The remaining 3 targets are means of implementation. Targets 58, facilitate sustainable infrastructure development for developing countries, support domestic technology development and industrial diversification, universal access to information and communications technology. Goal thus, reduced inequality. SDG thus is to reduce income inequality within and among countries. Unsat important indicators for this SDG are income disparities, aspects of gender and disability, as well as policies for migration and mobility of people. Sat. This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 10. The goal has 10 targets to be achieved by 2030. Progress towards targets will be measured by indicators. The first 7 targets are outcome targets: reduce income inequalities, promote universal social, economic and political inclusion, ensure equal opportunities and end discrimination, adopt fiscal and social policies that promotes equality, improved regulation of global financial markets and institutions, enhanced representation for developing countries in financial institutions, responsible and well-managed migration policies. The other 3 targets are means of implementation targets: except special and differential treatment for developing countries, encourage development assistance and investment in least developed countries, reduce transaction costs for migrant remittances. Basset. Goal 11, sustainable cities and communities. SDG 11 is to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Tirsat important indicators for this goal are the number of people living in urban slums, the proportion of the urban population who has convenient access to public transport, and the extent of built-up area per person. 15. This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 11. SDG 11 has thus targets to be achieved, and this is being measured with 15 indicators. The 7 outcome targets include safe and affordable housing, affordable and sustainable transport systems, inclusive and sustainable urbanization, 64 protection of the world's cultural and natural heritage, reduction of the adverse effects of natural disasters, reduction of the environmental impacts of cities, and to provide access to safe and inclusive green and public spaces. The 3 means of implementation targets per set include strong national and regional development planning, implementing policies for inclusion, resource efficiency, and disaster risk reduction in supporting the least developed countries in sustainable and resilient building. 66 Goal 12, responsible consumption and production. SDG 12 is to ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. Arsat one of the indicators is the number of national policy instruments to promote sustainable consumption and production patterns. 15. Another one is global fossil fuel subsidies. 15. An increase in domestic recycling and a reduced reliance on the global plastic waste trade are other actions that might help meet the goal. 69. This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 12. Sustainable Development Goal 12 has 11 targets. The first 8 are outcome targets, which are implement the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production patterns, achieve the sustainable management and efficient use of natural resources, reducing by half the per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels, and the reduction of food losses along production and supply chains, including post-harvest losses, achieving the environmentally sound management of chemicals and all wastes throughout their life cycle, reducing waste generation through prevention, reduction, recycling and reuse, encourage companies to adopt sustainable practices, promote public procurement practices that are sustainable, and ensure that people everywhere have the relevant information and awareness for sustainable development. The 3 means of implementation target 70 are support developing countries to strengthen their scientific and technological capacity, develop and implement tools to monitor sustainable development impacts, and remove market distortions, like fossil fuel subsidies that encourage wasteful consumption. 71. Goal 13, climate action. SDG 13 is to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts by regulating emissions and promoting developments in renewable energy. 72. In 2021 to early 2023, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, published its 6th assessment report which assesses scientific, technical, and socio-economic information concerning climate change. 73. This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 13. SDG 13 has 5 targets which are to be achieved by 2030. They cover a wide range of issues surrounding climate action. The first 3 targets are outcome targets: strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related disasters, integrate climate change measures into policies and planning, build knowledge and capacity to meet climate change. The remaining 2 targets are means of implementation. Target 74, to implement the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, and to promote mechanisms to raise capacity for planning and management. Along with each target, there are indicators that provide a method to review the overall progress of each target. The UNFCCC is the primary international, intergovernmental forum for negotiating the global response to climate change. Goal 14, life below water. SDG 14 is to conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas and marine resources for sustainable development. 75. The current efforts to protect oceans, marine environments and small-scale fishers are not meeting the need to protect the resources. 15. Increased ocean temperatures and oxygen loss act concurrently with ocean acidification to constitute the deadly trio of climate change pressures on the marine environment. 76. Nusa Lembongan Reef. This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 14. The first 7 targets are outcome targets: reduce marine pollution, protect and restore ecosystems, reduce ocean acidification, sustainable fishing, conserve coastal and marine areas, end subsidies contributing to overfishing, increase the economic benefits from sustainable use of marine resources. The last 3 targets are means of implementation. Target 77, to increase scientific knowledge, research and technology for ocean health, support small-scale fishers, implement and enforce international sea law. 78. Indicator 14.1.1b under Goal 14 specifically relates to reducing impacts from marine plastic pollution. 79. Goal 15, life on land. SDG 15 is to protect, restore and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss. 80. The proportion of remaining forest area, desertification, and species extinction risk are example indicators of this goal. 15. This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 15. The 9 outcome targets include conserve and restore terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems, end deforestation and restore degraded forests, end desertification and restore degraded land, ensure conservation of mountain ecosystems, protect biodiversity and natural habitats, protect access to genetic resources and fair sharing of the benefits, eliminate poaching and trafficking of protected species, prevent invasive alien species on land and in water ecosystems, and integrate ecosystem and biodiversity in governmental planning. The 3 means of implementation targets 80 to include increase financial resources to conserve and sustainably use ecosystem and biodiversity, finance and incentivize sustainable forest management, combat global poaching and trafficking. Goal 16, peace, justice and strong institutions. SDG Solar is to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Tirasi rates of birth registration and prevalence of bribery are two examples of indicators included in this goal. 8415. This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 16. SDG Solar has 10 outcome targets: reduce violence, protect children from abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and violence, promote the rule of law and ensure equal access to justice, combat organized crime and illicit financial and arms flows, substantially reduce corruption and bribery, develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions, ensure responsive, inclusive, and representative decision-making, strengthen the participation in global governance, provide universal legal identity, ensure public access to information, and protect fundamental freedoms. There are also two means of implementation targets: 85, strengthen national institutions to prevent violence and combat crime and terrorism, promote and enforce non-discriminatory laws and policies. 86. Goal 17, partnership for the goals. SDG 17 is to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. 87, increasing international cooperation is seen as vital to achieving each of the solar previous goals. 88, developing multi-stakeholder partnerships to facilitate knowledge exchange, expertise, technology, and financial resources is recognized as critical to overall success of the SDGs. The goal includes improving North, South, and South-South cooperation. Public-private partnerships which involve civil societies are specifically mentioned. 90. This section is an excerpt from Sustainable Development Goal 17. SDG 17 is a vision for improved and more equitable trade, as well as coordinated investment initiatives to promote sustainable development across borders. It is about strengthening and streamlining cooperation between nation-states, both developed and developing, using the SDGs as a shared framework and a shared vision for defining that collaborative way forward. 91, it seeks to promote international trade and an equitable trading system. 92, the goal has 17 targets to be achieved by 2030, broken down into 5 categories: finance, technology, capacity building, trade, and systemic issues. Progress towards targets will be measured by 25 indicators. 91, all these targets are regarded as means of implementation targets. 94, cross-cutting issues and synergies. Young people holding SDG banners in Lima, Peru. 3 aspects need to come together to achieve sustainable development. The economic, socio-political, and environmental dimensions are all vital and interdependent. 95, multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary research across all 3 sectors are required to achieve progress. This proves difficult when major governments fail to support it. 95, gender equality, education, culture, and health are examples of cross-cutting issues. These are some examples of various interlinkages inherent in the SDGs. Gender equality. The widespread consensus is that progress on all of the SDGs will be stalled if women's empowerment and gender equality are not prioritized and treated holistically. The SDGs look to policymakers as well as private sector executives and board members to work toward gender equality. 96, statements from diverse sources such as the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, UN Women, and the World Pensions Forum have noted that investments in women and girls have positive impacts on economies. National and global development investments in women and girls often exceed their initial scope. 98, gender equality is mainstreamed throughout the SDG framework by ensuring that as much sex disaggregated data as possible are collected. 99, 11, education and culture. Training on Education for Sustainable Development workshop in Kasese District, Uganda. Education for Sustainable Development, ESD, is explicitly recognized in the SDGs as part of Target 4.7 of the SDG on education. UNESCO promotes the Global Citizenship Education, GCED, as a complementary approach. 100, education for sustainable development is important for all the other solar SDGs. 101, culture is explicitly referenced in SDG 11 Target 4, strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. However, culture is seen as a cross-cutting theme because it impacts several SDGs. 99, for example, culture plays a role in SDG targets where they relate to environment and resilience, within SDGs 11, 12 and solar, prosperity and livelihoods, within SDG art, inclusion and participation, within SDG 11 and solar. 99, health. SDGs 8 to 6 directly address health disparities, primarily in developing countries. 100, these 6 goals address key issues in global public health, poverty, hunger and food security, health, education, gender equality and women's empowerment, as well as water and sanitation. 100, public health officials can use these goals to set their own agenda and plan for smaller scale initiatives for their organizations. The links between the various sustainable development goals and public health are numerous and well established. SDG 8, living below the poverty line, is attributed to poorer health outcomes and can be even worse for persons living in developing countries where extreme poverty is more common. 103, a child born into poverty is twice as likely to die before the age of 5 compared to a child from a wealthier family. 104, SDG 2, the detrimental effects of hunger and malnutrition that can arise from systemic challenges with food security are enormous. The World Health Organization estimates that 12.9% of the population in developing countries is undernourished. 105, SDG 4 and 5, educational equity has yet to be reached in the world. Public health efforts are impeded by this, as a lack of education can lead to poorer health outcomes. This is shown by children of mothers who have no education having a lower survival rate compared to children born to mothers with primary or greater levels of education. 104, synergies. Synergies amongst the SDGs are the good antagonists of trade-offs. 11, with regards to SDG 13 on climate action, the IPCC sees robust synergies particularly for the SDGs 13, health, 7, clean energy, 11, cities and communities, 12, responsible consumption and production, and 14, oceans. 10, 70. To meet SDG 13 and other SDGs, sustained long-term investment in green innovation is required to decarbonize the physical capital stock, energy, industry, and transportation infrastructure, and ensure its resilience to a changing future climate, to preserve and enhance natural capital, forests, oceans, and wetlands, and to train people to work in a climate-neutral economy. 106, 107, 108. Challenges. Difficulties with tracking qualitative indicators. Regarding the targets of the SDGs, there is generally weak evidence linking the means of implementation to outcomes. Purchase the targets about means of implementation, those denoted with a letter, for example, target chair.a, are imperfectly conceptualized and inconsistently formulated, and tracking their largely qualitative indicators will be difficult. Purchase. Trade-offs not explicitly addressed. The trade-offs among the 17 SDGs might prevent their realization. Yara, Chiasat, for example, these are three difficult trade-offs to consider. How can ending hunger be reconciled with environmental sustainability? SDG targets 2.3 and 15.2. How can economic growth be reconciled with environmental sustainability? SDG targets 9.2 and 9.4. How can income inequality be reconciled with economic growth? SDG targets 10.1 and 8.1. The SDGs do not specifically address the tensions between economic growth and environmental sustainability. Instead, they emphasize long-standing but dubious claims about decoupling and resource efficiency as technological solutions to the environmental crisis. 145, for example, continued global economic growth of 10%, SDG 8, may not be reconcilable with ecological sustainability goals because the required rate of absolute global eco-economic decoupling is far higher than any country has achieved in the past. 110. COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic slowed progress towards achieving the SDGs. At the UN High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development in July 2023, speakers remarked that the pandemic and multiple worldwide crises such as climate change threatened decades of progress on the SDGs. 111. Criticism. Too many goals and overall problems. Scholars have pointed out flaws in the design of the SDGs for the following aspects: the number of goals, the structure of the goal framework, for example, the non-hierarchical structure, the coherence between the goals, the specificity or measurability of the targets, the language used in the text, and their reliance on neoliberal economic development-oriented sustainable development as their core orientation. 109, 161. The SDGs may simply maintain the status quo and fall short of delivering an ambitious development agenda. The current status quo has been described as separating human well-being and environmental sustainability, failing to change governance and to pay attention to trade-offs, root causes of poverty and environmental degradation, and social justice issues. 4. A commentary in The Economist in 2015 argued that 169 targets for the SDGs is too many, describing them as sprawling, misconceived, and a mess compared to the 8 Millennium Development Goals, MDGs. 112. Weak on environmental sustainability. SDG Wedding Cake Model, a way of viewing the economic, social, and ecological aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. 113. Further information, sustainability. Scholars have criticized that the SDGs fail to recognize that planetary, people, and prosperity concerns are all part of one Earth system, and that the protection of planetary integrity should not be a means to an end, but an end in itself. 109, 147. The SDGs remain fixated on the idea that economic growth is foundational to achieve all pillars of sustainable development. 109. 147. They do not prioritize environmental protection. 109, 144. The SDGs include three environment-focused SDGs, which are Goal 13, 14, and 15, climate, land, and oceans, but there is no overarching environmental or planetary goal. 109, 144. The SDGs do not pursue planetary integrity as such. 109, 144. Environmental constraints and planetary boundaries are underrepresented within the SDGs. For instance, the way the current SDGs are structured leads to a negative correlation between environmental sustainability and SDGs, with most indicators within even the sustainability-focused goals focusing on social or economic outcomes. 114. They could unintentionally promote environmental destruction in the name of sustainable development. 115, 116. Certain studies also argue that the focus of the SDGs on neoliberal sustainable development is detrimental to planetary integrity and justice. Solar. Both of these ambitions, planetary integrity and justice, would require limits to economic growth. 109, 145. Scientists have proposed several ways to address the weaknesses regarding environmental sustainability in the SDGs. The monitoring of essential variables to better capture the essence of coupled environmental and social systems that underpin sustainable development, helping to guide coordination and systems transformation. 117. More attention to the context of the biophysical systems in different places, e.g., coastal river deltas, mountain areas. 118, 119. Better understanding of feedbacks across scales in space, e.g., through globalization, and time, e.g., affecting future generations, that could ultimately determine the success or failure of the SDGs. 120. Ethical aspects. There are concerns about the ethical orientation of the SDGs. They remain underpinned by strong, Western, modernist notions of development, sovereignty of humans over their environment, anthropocentrism, individualism, competition, freedom, rights rather than duties, self-interest, belief in the market leading to collective welfare, private property, protected by legal systems, rewards based on merit, materialism, quantification of value, and instrumentalization of labor. 109, 146. Some studies warn that the SDGs could be used to camouflage business as usual by disguising it using SDG-related sustainability rhetoric. Solar. A meta-analysis review study in 2022 found that there is even emerging evidence that the SDGs might have even adverse effects by providing a smokescreen of hectic political activity that blurs a reality of stagnation, dead ends, and business as usual. 220. Monitoring mechanism. Countries that are closest to meeting the SDGs, in dark blue, and those with the greatest remaining challenges, in the lightest shade of blue, in 20 lakhs 18,121. UN High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, HLPF. Main article, High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. The High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, HLPF, replaced the United Nations Commission on Sustainable Development in 2012-18. 216. It should be a regular meeting place for governments and non-state representatives to assess global progress towards sustainable development. 216. The meetings take place under the auspices of the United Nations Economic and Social Council. In July 2020, the meeting took place online for the first time due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The theme was Accelerated Action and Transformative Pathways, Realizing the Decade of Action and Delivery for Sustainable Development, and a ministerial declaration was adopted. 15. High-level progress reports for all the SDGs are published in the form of reports by the United Nations Secretary-General. The most recent one is from April 2020.15. However, the HLPF has a range of problems. Solar it has not been able to promote system-wide coherence. The reasons for this include its broad and unclear mandate combined with a lack of resources and divergent national interests. Solar therefore, this reporting system is mainly just a platform for voluntary reporting and peer learning among governments. Solar monitoring tools and websites. The online publication SDG Tracker was launched in June 2018 and presents data across all available indicators. 14 It relies on the Our World in Data database and is also based at the University of Oxford. 122 The publication has global coverage and tracks whether the world is making progress towards the SDGs. 124 It aims to make the data on the 17 goals available and understandable to a wide audience. 125 The SDG Tracker highlights that the world is currently, early 2019, very far away from achieving the goals. The Global SDG Index and Dashboards Report is the first publication to track countries' performance on all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. 126 The annual publication, co-produced by Bertelsmann Stiftung and SDSN, includes a ranking and dashboards that show key challenges for each country in terms of implementing the SDGs. The publication also shows an analysis of government efforts to implement the SDGs. Reporting on progress. Overall status. Reports by the United Nations, for example the UN Global Sustainable Development Report in 2019, and by other organizations who are tracking progress on the SDGs have repeatedly pointed out that the world is unlikely to achieve most of the targets by 2030 41 or earlier for those targets that have an earlier target yet. This is called the world is not on track. 127 of particular concern which cut across many of the SDGs are rising inequalities, ongoing climate change, and increasing biodiversity loss. 127 In addition, there is a trade-off between the planetary boundaries of Earth and the aspirations for wealth and well-being. This has been described as follows: the world's social and natural biophysical systems cannot support the aspirations for universal human well-being embedded in the SDGs. 127.41. Due to various economic and social issues, many countries are seeing a major decline in the progress made. In Asia, for example, data shows a loss of progress on goals 2, 8, 10, 11, and 15.1 to 8. Recommended approaches to still achieve the SDGs are: set priorities, focus on harnessing the environmental dimension of the SDGs, understand how the SDGs work as an indivisible system, and look for synergies. 128. Assessing the political impact of the SDGs. A scientific assessment released in 2022 analyzed the political impacts of the SDGs. It reviewed over 3,000 scientific articles, mainly from the social sciences. The study looked at possible discursive, normative, and institutional effects. The presence of all three types of effects throughout a political system is defined as transformative impact, which is the eventual goal of the 2030 Agenda. Solar discursive effects relate to changes in global and national debates that make them more aligned with the SDGs. Solar normative effects would be adjustments in legislative and regulatory frameworks and policies in line with, and because of, the SDGs. Institutional effects would be the creation of new departments, committees, offices, or programs linked to the achievement of the SDGs or the realignment of existing institutions. Solar The review found that the SDGs have had only limited transformative political impact thus far. Solar They have had mainly discursive effects only. Solar For example, the broad uptake of the principle of leaving no one behind in pronouncements by policymakers and civil society activists is a discursive effect. The SDGs have also led to some isolated normative and institutional reforms. Solar However, there is widespread doubt that the SDGs can steer societies towards more ecological integrity at the planetary scale. Solar This is because countries generally prioritize the more socio-economic SDGs, e.g. SDGs 8-12, over the environmentally oriented ones, e.g. SDGs 13-15, which is in alignment with their long-standing national development policies. Solar impacts of COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 had impacts on all 17 goals. It has become the worst human and economic crisis in a lifetime. 15. Though the pandemic threatened progress made in particular for SDG 3, health, SDG 4, education, SDG 6, water and sanitation for all, SDG 10, reduce inequality, and SDG 17, partnerships. 15. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, has also taken the initiative to achieve the SDGs by offering their support to developing countries. 129 For example, the IMF works to reduce poverty in low-income developing countries by offering financial support during the COVID-19 pandemic. Uneven priorities of goals. In 2019, 5 progress reports on the 17 SDGs were published. 3 came from the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA, 131, 1 from the Bertelsmann Foundation, and 1 from the European Union. 132, A review of the 5 reports analyzed which of the 17 goals were addressed in priority and which ones were left behind. 134, An explanation of the findings. The Basel Institute of Commons and Economics said biodiversity, peace and social inclusion were left behind by quoting the official SDGs motto leaving no one behind. 134. It has been argued that governments and businesses actively prioritize the social and economic goals over the environmental goals, such as Goal 14 and 15, in both rhetoric and practice. 135. SDG preferences in the world's 5 major SDG reports in 20,19,134. SDG topic. Rank. Average rank. Mentions. Health. 1. 3.2. 1814. Energy climate water. 2. 4.0. 1328 1328 1784. Education. 3. 4.6. 1351. Poverty. 4. 6.2. 1095. Food. 5. 7.6. 693. Economic growth. 6. 8.6 387 टेक्नोलॉजी 7 8.8 855 इनइक्वालिटी 8 9.2 296 जेंडर इक्वालिटी 9 10.0 338 हंगर 10 10.6 670 जस्टिस 11 10.8 328 गवर्नेंस 12 11.6 232 डिसेंट वर्क 13 12.2 277 पीस 14 12.4 282 क्लीन एनर्जी 15 12.6 272 लाइफ ऑन लैंड 16 14.4 250 लाइफ बिलो वाटर 17 15.0 248 सोशल इंक्लूजन 18 16.4 22 शो लेस cost estimates. The United Nations estimates that for Africa, considering the continent's population growth, yearly funding of 8.